around here, hey, you can't do that. You don't have permission to take my picture. Just kidding. Did she do that to everybody else too? Licensing fees. Oh, okay. It's a good thing I shaved this morning, huh? Anyway, how many folks are happy about the rain they've had the last couple of days? All right, that's good. Thank the Lord for that. Talk to folks hither and yon. You know, some folks to the west haven't gotten as much. I looked in at the University of Nebraska's drought monitor that they publish Thursday morning. I think they shut the data off on Tuesdays. And it's kind of interesting to see whether that thing changes very much from one week to the next. A lot of folks would look at that and say, you know, it really didn't change much. I had 3 or 4 inches of rain and I'm still in D4. The exceptional or extreme, whatever, I lose track of those 4 E words they use. Well, the way that works is they are looking at long-term moisture, long-term a view towards that. So one rain doesn't necessarily change things, and you know that if you've been pretty dry and you got a 3-inch rain and you had a crop out there that's using water and it doesn't rain for another 28 days, you're right back where you were. And so that's why that monitor is it changes slowly, and things have improved here. Last week, if you looked at it, you'd say Lubbock County was still in all of Lubbock County was still in the most extreme drought category. This morning, a little bit of Lubbock County's out of it. I know a farmer in Lubbock County that's had about prior to what we've had the last couple of days, has had over 9 inches of rain since July 1st. And you might be thinking, well, how come this map's telling me I still have extreme or exceptional drought? Well, he's in a small area, and that map doesn't reflect, you know, a couple of square miles where he's had those rains at. But certainly it's been interesting. That tool has kind of caught some public attention. I think it's probably been useful in communicating to folks outside of agriculture what we face. Folks in the eastern U.S., they don't have a worry right now. Now, that doesn't mean you don't run into a farmer just begging for rain, but those are some things that come out in the weather and the climate. And the fellow that was here this morning, Jody James, he is my next door neighbor. So I get to swap weather talk over the fence with him quite a bit. Just kind of climate, weather, and global warming. And it's interesting to hear Jody. I don't think he has a dog in the fight about whether global warming is occurring. He just looks at the numbers and say, here's some questions that we have. And you know, I think a lot of us, you know, maybe have some skepticism, possibly healthy about that. But the reality is yes, we do have these temperatures, and I've had kind of neutral-like arguments with folks about global warming. And I have a colleague, scientist through and through. And the one thing about the global situation is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing, and it's still very low. But it is about, if you go back to the late 1880s, at the beginning of the industrial age, carbon dioxide levels now are about 40% higher in what we breathe than they were. And so in that regard, yes, that's one of those things that traps greenhouse gases and can cause warming. And there's folks that understand all that a little bit more, but I'm a little bit, because I know some folks from my time in Minnesota that just look at the data, they don't have a dog in the fight like my neighbor Jody. And they just kind of report things, so I'm a little less quick to be skeptical. Let's say, let's see what they have to say, and maybe that has something to teach us down the road. Okay, enough of that. All right, perennial grasses. Thanks to the Alliance project here, we've been able to work over at Eddie's for several years. We established this project in 2006. And the first goal is in 2006, we irrigated everything. I'm just going to switch forward here to a picture so you can get a little feel for what it looks like in the field. Many of you, if not most of you, have seen this. We had 13 original grass species. Some of them we had more than one species. We had different varieties of a couple of Old World blue stems and Bermuda grass. But in 2006, when we established it, the goal was to just get this thing established. And so we irrigated everything to ensure that we had it established. Then we implemented our irrigation treatments in 2007. And this is an example of what we had there. This is in October. We're getting ready to make an end of the season harvest. These are some of the species that we have out here. I'm going to show you some yields. The yield data that I will show you is from 2007 through 2010. 2010. It's 4 years. Now, in 2007, we had a wet year. And so we hardly irrigated this thing at all. And so the numbers, the differences that you would see between what was irrigated and what was not are really pretty small. And so when I actually looked at the impact of irrigation treatments, I looked at 2008 through 2010. Stands start to thin down a little bit in some cases, or we get contamination from other grasses. And so it's a little bit hard to keep things pure the way we'd like. If I had to do this over again, I would have put some more space in between these, because we'd end up with seed a little bit coming over from next door and making some extra work trying to hoe things out, and eventually you can't keep up with it. But 2011, our plan was, we got our data. 2011 was the massive drought, no data. And then I'm going to show you some ratings in early 2012 where I looked at the regrowth, how well did this come back. Now you know that 2012 also, very dry. And the numbers I have are after one irrigation. We looked at that, and then I have some numbers that Chuck and Phil took just yesterday in terms of what kind of stand we have in there in terms of ground coverage and so forth. Okay, so let me back up here. All right. Okay. Question when we started this is, we felt at the time that there was certainly an interest in people maybe going back to perennial grasses as a mean to maybe stop the bloodletting in terms of trying to make a reasonable income on marginal land, perhaps. What we see here is what we projected, that we'd have a certain amount of acreage out here because of lack of irrigation, going back into permanent range pasture. I'm not sure that's happened. We've seen commodity prices jump up. And one of the things that I think maybe a lot of us didn't expect when we thought we might have a lot of land going back into some permanent pasture is the discussion about what a lot of folks have done with CRP when it came out. Now, if we could go back about 15 years, maybe 20, and have chosen some different grasses for what the CRP requested that you put in, things might have been a little bit different. I know, especially in the Lubbock area south, what is the common grass that ended up on a lot of CRP land? Anybody know? Weeping lovegrass, weeping lovegrass. And it's a bunch grass. It grows well. Is it something that if a CRP contract were to end, that a farmer or landowner might be willing to keep? Phil, how many folks do you know hate weeping lovegrass? What's that? Yes. Yeah, most people. And Ted McCollum will be here after lunch. I've heard Ted give talks about, well, here's how you manage weeping lovegrass to keep it productive. You got to keep it grazed down. You got to keep it from getting coarse, which it tends to do very quickly. Well, Ted, that's what you're talking about. It's expensive. And it's not something that's easily replaced. I don't know, Rick, if you could go into weeping lovegrass and put something else in there that would be aggressive, that could gradually take over. I don't know if that would happen. But anyway, so what we ran into, and we had this on a couple of talk tours. Remember in September, about 3 or 4 years ago, we were on a turn row up here somewhere to the northwest, Floyd County, and there was a discussion about taking CRP grass out and going back into agriculture. Producers were talking about, trying to no-till straight into it, burn down, kill grass, tillage, whatever it be. And one of the questions that we asked to growers, we were standing in a circle, there were about 20 or 25 of us, and the question that I asked the growers is, as people were taking land out of CRP or thinking about it, was the economics of dryland farming better, say in 2010, I'll say this again, was the economics of dryland farming in 2010 better than it was when the land went into CRP 10 or 15 years ago? And everybody agreed that the answer was no. And yet we had the land coming out of the CRP. So I think, Phil, that attests to the fact that people did not see a future for keeping land with CRP grass if it was weeping lovegrass. Now, Rick, correct me, that more common CRP grasses up in this area would be okay, but weeping lovegrass is not common in this area. Okay, it's not. He said Blue grama, Cidox grama, a couple other grasses there. So maybe I mentioned something that wasn't relevant for the folks here, but that's just one of the observations that we've had, especially in those areas south of Lubbock. Why did that land go into CRP? Because it was highly erodible, as much as anything. So is that problem going to be less when it comes out? It might be a little bit if they build up some root matter in that, and not necessarily organic matter, but just root matter in that top. Their farming practices will probably have an impact on that. So anyway, Lotany grass trial. What grass species are suitable, adaptable to this region? You know, all the crops that we look at here, I get calls probably a dozen times a year on 5 or 6 or 7 other crops that we don't grow here. Somebody asking about whether something would grow up here. And most often, they're asking about something that is just simply not adapted to the Texas High Plains. My job prior to coming to Lubbock, in Minnesota, I worked, it was more of a greenhouse lab project. It was tied to the Philippines. It was rice. My first job out of Minnesota was at Beaumont at the Agriculture Research Station there for A&M. That was rice work. Yes, I've had people ask me on the phone, naively, you got all that irrigation water up in the High Plains. Can you grow rice up there too? And, you know, I have to explain that that water is very precious and it would drain out the bottom too quick. So anyway, in addition to dry land, we had 2 target irrigation levels here. One was ideal, we were shooting for about 1 inch a week. The other was about, ½ inch a week. The other was about 2 inches a week. So these are what we call low and moderate levels of irrigation. I said 13 grasses earlier. The Wrangler, the seeded Bermuda that we put in just did not do well. It might have been a seed issue. I don't think Wrangler itself was the problem. It was more likely a seed issue there. There's the irrigation levels. What we shot for was, in essence, was probably more likely around May 1st. We tried to get this watered early in April if we were dry to get things going. Again, you know, Caucasian Old World Blue Stem, Blue grama, Indian grass over here. We'll show some numbers about Indian grass. Has not been persistent in our trials. Alamo switchgrass, you've heard a lot about that from biomass, bioenergy uses, at least the potential. And we also see from our numbers that it has not persisted as well in the stands here. Blue grama, I'm on vacation last week. I'm on a scenic train ride from Antonito, Colorado to Chama, New Mexico, the Cumbres and Toltec. And I'm thinking about my Lotany grass trial when I'm up at 9,000 feet. Why? Because when I'm looking down off the open air car with my kids, I see blue grama growing at 9,000 feet in the San Juan Mountains. And I think, man, it's tough stuff, widely adapted. The thing, Phil, that I saw that was interesting to see blue grama. The thing that was impressive in a negative sense is I also saw bindweed going up there at 9,000 feet also. I thought I would ask our weed guys, it says, that didn't make sense to me that you'd find bindweed up in the San Juan Mountains, but it was there. It could have come off the train or something, but it looked like it was doing pretty well. There's probably people who don't know are probably, wow, look at the pretty flowers on that little plant that's out there matting the landscape. Okay, so these are some numbers. This is more numbers than I'm supposed to show you folks on one table. And for those of you who are interested, we do have some summaries up here. We've got 2 different forms of this table and a summary here. We'll pass those out and have another item as well. But this is, what I've done is I've averaged all the irrigation levels together. Now make a note here. This isn't, in order to get some information, meaningful information on one table, I went ahead and averaged the dry land, the low level, and the moderate level. Part of the reason I can do this is because in 2 of these 4 years, in 2007 and again in 2010, we had a pretty wet year. And so we were not irrigating very much because there was just simply not a need for it. These other 2 years we had a little drier, we have some more irrigation levels. So what you see here is that season in 2009, we irrigated 7 times. We had the low level got irrigated with 1 inch 7 times. The high level got irrigated 7 times with 2 inches. So you can see what some of these numbers here. The main thing is as you look at a range of numbers here, you say buffalo grass, all right, 2 1/4 tons per acre, average over 4 years. Well, obviously that's not very much. Buffalo grass, this is just a side note. When the city of Lubbock realizes they're going to have to continue to keep pumping water because people want to have a lawn, and my wife says, how come we can't have a fescue lawn? Well, Beth, it's because I don't want to water that much, and I don't want to have to mow an extra 2 months out of the year. But I think that, some people, the public in an urban environment is used to things being green, and you get it by water. And if we ever hit a spot, we don't want to be like Santa Fe, where, you may be allowed 300 square feet of grass. And right now, I think they can't water it if they even have it. But the thing is, buffalo grass, if it goes dormant, actually looks fairly reasonable. It doesn't turn brown, it kind of turns gray. And I could actually see where in a dry environment the buffalo grass, some variations of it, could be a decent lawn grass. Okay, but anyway, so here's the names you know. These Old World Blue stems get a lot of attention. This WWB doll has been, for over 10 years now, has been a grass that's been highlighted. You see that it performed very well here. Over 4 years, the only grass that surpassed it was switchgrass. And so if you're thinking about being a cattleman here, you're looking for something that's producing forage yields. How well does Alamo switchgrass really feed for cattle? It may be one of those instances that you really kind of have to keep it grazed back. It gets coarse. Any of these grasses can get coarse, except for maybe some of our smaller ones here. Forage quality of these Old World Blue stems, that's the kicker question, is what do you give up possibly? Because in general, a rule of thumb is, with forages, as maturity advances, which means higher biomass, you get a decline in forage quality. That's true with wheat, small grains, that's true with grasses, that's true with hay grazer. You get hay grazer that's headed out versus hay grazer that's in boot stage versus hay grazer that hasn't got to boot stage, and you've got a 4, 5, 6% difference in crude protein. And if you're selling hay and somebody doesn't give a squat, Bob, about forage quality, then to make money, you got to sell in pounds. Otherwise, if you can capture value because of forage quality, we encourage people to do it. But certainly these Old World Blue stems here did very well. I will add as a side note that Spar Old World Blue stem, along with Klein grass, this is the Selection 75, is the so-called variety that we had here. Those were the two grasses back in 2006, and also in a trial that we initiated at Brownfield. Those were the two grasses that if you walked out there, if I sent one of my daughters out there who was 7 or 8 years old at the time and said, Victoria, pick out the ones, these blocks out here that you think look the best. If I did that in the fall of 2006, or even probably in the summer of 2006 when we seeded in early April, she would have picked out Klein grass and Spar Old World Blue stem. They established very well. So yields here again, this is what we've got, the variation across years. Now, here's a question. I should mention this earlier. This number I'm going to tell you here, this 26%, is a reflection of the fact that we didn't really have a dry year in this 4-year time frame, and 2 of them, 2007, 2010, were relatively wet. For all species, again, this is a simplification, but for all species, the low level of irrigation increased forage yield over the dry land by 26%. Is that a lot or little? Well, for 2, that's 7, 14, that's 17 inches of irrigation, so we averaged about 4 inches of irrigation over time. In this case, we increased our forage yield about 26%. If we look at the moderate level of irrigation, where we would have been at about 8 inches on average of irrigation per year, we increased our biomass by about 36%. Somebody who understands economics could probably look at this, Steve, and tell us, is that a good return for the irrigation water that we put on there? And I think we will take a look at doing that and get an understanding of where we're at. But I would say the first thing that strikes me is, yes, we had some pretty good rainfall in here. I cut this off in October when our growth starts, but I'm not sure that those yield increases that we got for the amount of irrigation would have necessarily been economic, because in these 4 years, we actually did pretty well with rain-fed conditions. Okay, now, this is regrowth rate. It's 2011. A drought to forget. 2012 comes along, and if we hadn't had 2011 before, we would have thought we were very miserable. But this is a regrowth rating. How did these grasses start to come back? We had a little bit of rainfall, and we had 1 irrigation in here, and so in The date, I believe, was May 22nd of 2012. I walked into to the plots and I rated them. 0 as if I had no regrowth. 1, it was poor. 2, it was fair. 3, it was good. 4, it was very good. And so I don't have the scale on here, but if you've got something here, we got the regrowth ratings. We got seeded Bermuda grass down here was about 1.5. This is the average of the, this is the average. Okay, you know what? Got a problem here. My background, when I slip this over in here, does not show you the dryland, because the dryland data that's on the screen is in white, so it's not there. But if you see the gray bars you see are the irrigated. That's the average of both of them. The dry land for most of these runs between about 1/4 and 1.0. It was much less. It did show us that the effect of the irrigation did have a positive effect on helping these grasses spring back a little bit. If you want to see this data, I've got it on print, or if you want to look at it in color on my screen, it shows up if I'm looking on the computer here. We can take a look at that. But anyway, grasses that were showing good regrowth here. We've got our blue grama, the natives blend. Chuck and Phil's data from yesterday said that most of that natives blend today is blue grama. Buffalo grass, side oats also doing fairly well. Our old world blue stems dulled down a little bit. The Indian grass here, where it was irrigated, the regrowth was fairly good, but we've seen that stand start to peter out. Now this is data here, again, I got the same problem here, Chuck. I didn't know that, I couldn't have known this was going to happen, because on the screen I've got gray and I've got nearly black there, but when I go up on the screen here, I've got very little. But this is the ground cover, so we'll look at the more important data that I wanted to show you here is not showing up. The gray bar there, we're going to see if Phil is an ordinary magician with a computer or a really good one. Is that right? Anyway, what Chuck and Phil did just yesterday is they went in and they looked at the percentage of ground cover of the target grass species that was seeded. And those numbers range from 0 in one case, which was Indian grass, that essentially the Indian grass was gone and not survived. We had a couple others in there where the ground cover was down in the 20-30% range, and a lot of these were running up there. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go back to full screen. That'll take care. You won't have to place it. No, that's all right. We'll get there pretty quick. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Phil. So in the white here, percent cover of the seeded species. So for example, blue grama, we had about a 57-58% of the ground is covered by blue grama. That is, there's a little bit in there that's bare soil when you look down at it. In the case of blue grama, we only had an infestation of about 1 or 2% of other grasses. So that's seed that's come from other plots if it did seed out and so forth. What we see here was switchgrass. After 2 very dry years and going through 2012, we have very little switchgrass left. So that's a question. I would not expected that when switchgrass is talked about for being a biomass grass, and you had a pure stand of switchgrass out there. I don't know if it's something that has to be reseeded or tore up after a few years. Clyde grass, again, like up here with our natives blend, which is predominantly blue grama and side oats grama when it was seeded. And I believe you said, Chuck, that most of the grass that's left in that 3 blend is now Hatchita blue grama. So pine grass also looking well. The old world blue stem's a little bit lower. The one thing I noticed about the old world blue stems, where we had irrigated at higher levels, actually we had a lower stand presence in these stands later on. So that was something that's puzzled about. Indian grass, I know one of my guys in the seed industry thinks Indian grass is a good fit out here, but after 2 years of drought, we basically have none of it left. We never did get the kind of stand that we really wanted in that grass. We've got sprig Bermuda and seed Bermuda over here as well. Okay, all right, let's go forward here with a little bit. Again, I mentioned that these are the percentage increases that I had when I looked at the low level of irrigation versus the dry land, the moderate level of irrigation versus the dry land. Now, this is an average of all 12 grasses. That number is going to range from probably about 15% to around 30%, maybe 40%. This number is even more than that. But whatever grass you use, and I think if I could step out on a limb here and say, based on the data that we've seen out of Lockney, if I was a producer here in this area that's looking at seeding down, I would set forth that maybe spar or World Blue Stem might be one of your best bets. There's a lot of discussion about Dahl. Dahl has been just a little bit more productive than the spar has, but the spar was very easy to establish. And it is something that we tend to recommend or suggest, at least on dryland. Just remember that when you go for high forage yield, you're going to get lower forage quality. And so whether it's a grazing or haying situation, that's a factor that comes into play. Good quality grass seed. You want to be low on foreign seed, that could be wheat seed. Watch out on grass seed. If you're buying grass seed, you like to see a germ test that's within probably the last year or so. I'm not so sure that they're not required to do it every year, but sometimes you get a seed dealer that's a little desperate. He's had some seed, he's been hanging on to it for quite a while, and needs to get that stuff sold, or it truly isn't going to grow. Go for the seed industry. Their kind of motto is good quality seed bags. Okay, the other thing here about perennial grass is that this is the future. And I ask this question now in several ways. But in the case of perennial grasses, if you are getting ready to move into a perennial grass stand, then you need to think about weed control, because when you go to those grasses, you're going to have fewer options. And so you start to think about in the year or the 2 years before you go to perennial grasses, what can I do to start planting the right crop, using the right herbicides to get some of these things cleaned up. Could be the perennials that you're after. If you can get a good standout grass out there, it will suppress a lot of weeds, especially the annuals. You think about pigweed. Well, I know this field's got a big blatant pool of pigweed seed on it. You go to perennial grasses, they're going to have to fight it out for a while, because grasses grow pretty slow. Some of these grasses that we put out here, if you look at them at the end of 2006, you'd say, well, that doesn't really look very good. By the end of 2007, you would have forgot about it, because they had filled in and looked pretty well. This same issue with weed control comes up as we hear about people in the irrigation sense going with folks that realize they've got a little bit of irrigation water left. They probably know they're headed dry land. Then, to get into dry land, their cropping options may change. Their tillage practices may change. If they're trying to go no-till and so forth, where they don't have the ability to incorporate herbicides, then if you're still irrigating a little bit, then you've got some options like prowl and so forth for your irrigation, that maybe you can try to get some things cleaned up before you fully go to a no-till situation or into dry land. All right, I have a couple more slides on a different topic, but let's pause here for a moment for any comments or questions on the perennial grasses. Okay, anything? I have the data from the numbers that were on the slides up here are on the table up here, so you can get a copy of them. Okay, one other just quick item here that I'll mention because it's timely and it's going on right now. Okay, you know what? I have one more slide here. Back to the grasses. What we saw here, Daddies, is it saving us water compared to what we could have done? Yes, this was a dryland corner that would have been in dryland perennial grasses. We took the opportunity to use siphon off some irrigation water. Would this been a viable system? Pine grass spar, would these have been viable alternatives to any irrigation at all? Especially if a farmer feels like he's under the gun, under pressure financially on dry land, trying to keep up, needs to stop the bloodbath. Do these things generate potentially the income that you would need to justify doing this? So how would they compare to another crop production system? So those are just some questions that we have from some things that we've learned from working at Eddie's. Okay.